In this sequence of videos, we're going to talk about an approach to pedagogy, or a cluster of approaches to pedagogy that we're going to call authentic pedagogy. I'll explain what I mean by that word in a moment. But in fact, the word that's most often used, or more commonly used, is progressivism. I mean, we're not using the word progressivism because what does it mean? I mean, progress is something better than something else, something after something else. Who knows what it means? I mean, it's commonly used, but we use the word authentic because it's got some more useful descriptive connotations to it, which I'm going to come to in a moment. Authentic or progressivist pedagogy really stands in distinction to didactic pedagogy. Here's a humorous image of the kind of aura that comes with didactic pedagogy, where the teacher's authoritarian and the kids are bored and cranky. What do we mean by authentic? Why are we using this word instead of the word progressive? Well, authentic implies a certain trueness to the interests of the child. You know, the child is really interested in what they're doing. It's authentic to them in terms of its learning that makes sense. It's motivated by genuine learner interest, and it's authentic in the sense that the substance of learning is manifestly relevant to society. When Winston Churchill was learning Latin grammar, or Charles Darwin was doing whatever the boring things were at school, it wasn't obvious to them that it was going to be relevant to their lives. This was relevant learning that was really relevant and really worth doing. But also there's another sense in which it's authentic, which is the teacher is positioned as a curriculum designer. They're not just the conduit of what's in the textbook and what's in the syllabus, and they're designing curriculum that fits with local conditions, which describes the nearby world, which is close to the interests of their students because the teacher is nearer to those things. So what they can do is authentic in the sense that it articulates between the teacher's understanding of the student's needs and the students as they're actually encountered in the classroom. Now, to go through some of the famous people who over time have really given shape to these ideas, one of the earliest people to rail against didactic curriculum was the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the inventors of modern ideas of equality and democracy, somebody who was, in a sense, one of the intellectual fathers, if you like, of the French Revolution. And a famous quote from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he says, "Teach your scholar to observe the phenomena of nature, you will soon rouse his curiosity." Remember poor Darwin, whose curiosity wasn't roused by school. But if you'd have it grow, do not be too great in order to hurry to satisfy this curiosity. Put the problems before him and let him solve them himself. Let him know nothing because you've told him, but because he's learned it for himself. If you ever substitute authority for reason, he will cease to reason. He will be a mere plaything of other people's thoughts. So these are 18th century democratic ideas. You know, don't tell people things. Let people think them through for themselves, because the faculty of reason is their right. It's their endowment as human beings. So don't cramp that by telling them things. Let them reason things through themselves. Let them be their own thinkers. So this was Jean-Jacques Rousseau speaking several hundred years ago, but also in a way what he's doing is explicitly saying how horrible the conventional schoolroom is. So this is a counterpoint to didactic pedagogy. If Jean-Jacques Rousseau didn't put any of this stuff into practice, some of the people who turn up at the turn of the 20th century do begin to put some of these ideas into practice in some very powerful ways. One of the most important people is Miss Maria Montessori. She began with a school in the very poor parts of the city of Rome. She's an Italian. And what she does is, and also with a lot of students within that school with various forms of disability. And what she does is she builds a school which is called the Casa dei Bambini, which was opened in 1907. And in that, the children played. They explored objects. I mean, she's the inventor of rods, the the wooden blocks which demonstrate the principles of fractions. So in other words, it was a very hands-on, very tangible kind of education. And there's a photo here of one of those early schools full of light, the kids on the floor, they're not sitting in desks, and so on. And there's a photo, another photo here when she's an old woman in a Montessori classroom. These become famous kinds of, it becomes a famous methodology. And today there are a lot of Montessori schools which, in a very doctrinaire way and a way which is true to Montessori's theory and the actual Montessori contraptions, they're called, these beautiful wooden objects are recreated in exactly the same way that she originally recreated them in the first part of the 20th century. So, there are Montessori schools, but in fact, Montessori has been tremendously influential on kindergarten education, early childhood education and kindergarten education. So what Montessori says is the school must permit the free, natural manifestations of the child if scientific pedagogy is to be born. So she's actually a medical doctor by training, and she wants to build pedagogy as a scientific system. She's trying to build this up as a systematic study which translates into a systematic practice. And she goes on, the true concept of liberty is practically unknown to educators of her day. The principle of slavery still pervades pedagogy, and therefore the same principle pervades the school. She wants the school not to be a place which is run like a slave plantation. Then in the United States, a key thinker is John Dewey. He is a philosopher, an educator who initially works in Chicago. He sets up a school in Chicago. He's connected with the University of Chicago, and then later in his career, he moves to Columbia University in New York. And what he was interested in is experiential education. So we see here a picture of an old classroom that he was involved in where the students are doing needlework, for example, instead of learning academic things. They're doing stuff, these students might be going to become seamstresses or work as plumbers or electricians if they're boys. It was very sort of sex segregated in those days in terms of one's destiny, and that if that's what you're actually going to do in life, learn those things at school, do those things experientially. And what Dewey says philosophically is, he said, look, to imposition from above, the traditional didactic pedagogy is opposed expression and cultivation of individuality. To external discipline is opposed free activity. To learning from text and teachers, learning from experience. Experience is a really important concept for Dewey. To acquisition of isolated skills and techniques by drill is opposed acquisition of them as a means of attaining ends which make direct and vital appeal. To preparation for a more or less remote future is opposed the making the most of opportunities in present life, to become a seamstress, to become a technical tradesperson, for example. To static aims and materials, the abstract textbook and the content of the curriculum, is opposed acquaintance with the changing world. Do things which are relevant to that world, which are experiential, which are going to be relevant to your life. So this is Dewey speaking. Now, Dewey becomes one of the great American philosophers, and his overall philosophical system is called pragmatism. And in a sense, his early work in schools is a kind of a foretaste of what he then does, building this American school of pragmatist philosophy. Going now to England, another famous player in this whole progressivist movement is a man by the name of A.S. Neill. He set up a school called Summerhill, which became a famous book. And in this school, there were no rules. The kids could go to class if they wanted to and not go to class if they didn't want to. The classes were very, very open. The students could choose what they want to do. So it really institutionalized in a radical kind of way this idea of choice. don't force anything on a child. Let them do what they want to do in their own time, at their own pace. And what Summerhill does, it tells in quite lyrical terms the stories of children who weren't at all interested and weren't going to do their schoolwork. And then they got bored and they decided they would. And the minute they decided they would, they started to flourish. So it's a kind of it's a famous book. It's a rhetorical book about this very, very open, free schooling. To move now to India, I want to move to the example of Tagore. Tagore, in fact, was a great Bengali poet. And he won the Nobel Prize in a funny University of Illinois story, which I think I should tell because it's not relevant to the narrative, but I might as well tell it. Tagore actually sent his son to the University of Illinois to do agriculture. This was a great agricultural school in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And when he learned that he got the Nobel Prize, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913, he was actually staying here at the University of Illinois with his son when he learned that he'd won the Nobel Prize. Anyhow, what he did was he again wanted to build an alternative system of education. So he built this school called the Patha Bhavana School in Calcutta. His family had been very wealthy. This was on family lands that he built it, some just north of Calcutta. And it was to be connected with agricultural life, connected with the real material world. We have a couple of photographs here, one of Tagore teaching out in the outdoors in the school, very close to nature, and another quite wonderful photograph of him sitting and talking with Mahatma Gandhi. And this is what Tagore said about didactic pedagogy compared to the ideals of his Patha Bhavana school. He said, "The child's life is subjected to the education factory, lifeless, colourless, dissociated from the content of the universe, within bare white walls, staring like the eyeballs of the dead." You can tell he's a poet. "We are born with that God-given gift of taking delight in the world. But such activity is fettered and imprisoned and muted by the force called discipline, which kills the sensitivities of the child's mind, which is always on the alert, restless and eager to receive first-hand knowledge from Mother Nature. Instead, we sit inert like dead specimens of some museum, while lessons are pelted on us from on high like hailstones on flowers." So he wanted to do stuff which was relevant to the agricultural life, relevant to farming life. And, the higher form of that was he sent his son to the University of Illinois to study agriculture.